Every muscle in my lower back screamed as I lifted another tray of champagne flutes, the crystal catching the amber light of Bellacourt's crystal chandeliers. The upscale Italian restaurant always smelled of expensive cologne mixed with truffle oil and aged wine, scents that reminded me daily of everything I'd lost, and everything I could never afford again. My white polyester blouse stuck to my skin, despite the evening's cool October air drifting through the restaurant's glass doors, each movement sending another sharp reminder of the secret I'd been hiding for 3 months now. I pressed my free hand briefly against my still flat stomach, a gesture I'd started making unconsciously whenever the exhaustion became overwhelming. The pregnancy test hidden in my bedroom drawer had confirmed what my body already knew, but I hadn't found the courage to see a doctor yet. How could I, when each shift at Bellacourt barely covered my mother's medication and the rent on our tiny apartment? "Jasmine, table 12 needs their wine selection," Marcus called from behind the bar, his voice carrying that edge it always had when the VIP section filled up. Marcus Rodriguez had been the head server here for 8 years, and he ran the evening shift like a military operation. His perfectly pressed black vest and crisp white shirt made him look like he belonged in this world of Italian marble and gold fixtures, unlike the rest of us who were just playing dress-up. "The Castellano party?" I asked, already knowing the answer. That name had been whispered through the restaurant all week. Vincent Castellano, owner of half the real estate in the city's financial district, was known for dropping thousands on a single meal and tipping like he was trying to solve world hunger. Marcus nodded toward the private dining room behind frosted glass panels. "They've been waiting 10 minutes. Don't mess this up, Williams." Mr. Bellacourt himself called to make sure everything was perfect tonight. I balanced the wine selection on my tray, my hands steadier than they had any right to be given the nausea that had been my constant companion for weeks. The private dining room was where Bellacourt entertained their most important guests, a space designed to make millionaires feel like billionaires. Persian rugs covered polished marble floors, and original oil paintings lined walls painted in deep burgundy. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The metallic taste of anxiety coated my tongue as I approached the frosted glass doors. Through the translucent barrier, I could see the shadows of several figures seated around the table, their voices a low murmur of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter. My reflection in the glass showed a young woman who looked older than her 24 years, dark circles under brown eyes that had once sparkled with dreams of finishing college and becoming a teacher. I knocked softly and pushed open the door, immediately struck by the scent of expensive cigars and leather that seemed to cling to important men like cologne. "Good evening, gentlemen. I have your wine selection for this evening." The words died in my throat as I looked up from my tray and met a pair of steel-gray eyes I'd hoped never to see again. Vincent Castellano sat at the head of the table like he owned not just the room but everyone in it, his black hair perfectly styled and his charcoal suit fitting his broad shoulders like it had been sewn directly onto his body. At 42, he was even more imposing than I remembered, his presence filling the space with an authority that made the other men at the table seem like shadows. For a moment that felt like an eternity. Neither of us moved. His eyes traveled over my face with the same intensity I remembered, but now there was something else there too. Something that made my chest tighten with a familiar panic. Recognition, satisfaction, and something darker that I didn't want to name. "Gentlemen," Vincent said without breaking eye contact with me, his voice carrying that same smooth authority that had once made me feel protected rather than trapped. "I believe we can continue this conversation at my office tomorrow. I find myself distracted." The other men exchanged glances but didn't argue. They knew better than to question Vincent Castellano when he used that tone. Chairs scraped against marble as they gathered their papers and filed out, leaving me alone with the man I'd spent 2 years running from. "Close the door, Jasmine." It wasn't a request. Nothing with Vincent ever was. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle, the wine glasses on my tray clinking together like wind chimes in a storm. The soft click of the door closing felt like the sound of a trap snapping shut. "You've been difficult to find," he said, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of a predator. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just gotten smaller, worn down by long shifts and sleepless nights worrying about bills I couldn't pay. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days, to be exact. The fact that he'd been counting made my knees weak. I set the tray down on a side table with hands that shook despite my efforts to control them. "Mr. Castellano, I'm just here to serve your wine selection. If you'd prefer a different server—" "What I'd prefer," he interrupted, moving around the table with measured steps, "is to know why the woman who shared my bed for 8 months disappeared in the middle of the night without so much as a goodbye note." My back hit the wall as he approached, the burgundy paint feeling cold through my thin blouse. Vincent stopped just close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that brought back memories I'd worked hard to suppress. He placed one hand against the wall beside my head, not quite trapping me but making it clear that leaving would require going through him. "I had my reasons," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I'm sure you did." His free hand reached out to touch my cheek, and I flinched before I could stop myself. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of what might have been hurt before his features hardened again. "You look tired, Jasmine. Thin. This place isn't treating you well." "It's honest work. So was what you had with me." The accusation in his voice made me lift my chin in defiance. "We both know that's not true. Nothing about your world is honest, Vincent." "My world," he repeated, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that I remembered all too well. "And yet, here you are, in my world again, serving wine to men who would destroy you without a second thought if they knew what you once meant to me." The past tense should have been a relief, but instead, it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I pressed my hand protectively over my stomach again, the gesture so quick I didn't think he'd notice. I was wrong. Vincent's eyes dropped to where my hand rested, and for a moment, his mask slipped entirely. The powerful businessman disappeared, replaced by something raw and hungry that made my heart race for all the wrong reasons. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you mean." "How long, Jasmine?" The question hung between us like a blade waiting to fall. I could lie, but Vincent had always been able to read me like an open book. Even now, after everything that had happened, he saw too much. 3 months, I whispered. His hand moved from the wall to my face, cupping my cheek with a gentleness that was somehow more terrifying than any show of force would have been. "Mine?" I closed my eyes, unable to look at him as I gave the answer that would change everything. "Yes." When I opened my eyes again, Vincent Castellano was smiling, and it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Part 2. The Siege. The silence that followed my confession felt heavier than the marble walls surrounding us. Vincent's thumb traced my cheekbone with a tenderness that sent shivers down my spine, his gray eyes studying my face like he was memorizing every detail. I wanted to pull away, to run like I had 2 years ago, but my body betrayed me by leaning into his touch. 3 months, he repeated, his voice carrying a satisfaction that made my stomach clench. "You've been carrying my child for 3 months, working in this place, lifting heavy trays, standing on your feet for hours." His hand moved to cover mine where it rested protectively over my belly. "That ends now." "Vincent, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He stepped back, giving me room to breathe but somehow making me feel more trapped than before. "I understand that you're working yourself to exhaustion because you're too stubborn to come to me for help. I understand that you're risking our child's health because you'd rather suffer than accept what I can provide." The possessive way he said "our child" made my heart race with a mixture of fear and something I didn't want to acknowledge. I pushed myself off the wall, smoothing down my wrinkled blouse with hands that still trembled. I can take care of myself. I have been taking care of myself. Have you? Vincent pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like a detailed report. Jasmine Williams, 24 years old, currently 3 months behind on rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in Riverside. Mother, Patricia Williams, stage 4 breast cancer. Treatments at St. Mary's Hospital costing approximately $8,000 monthly. Current savings, $437. The blood drained from my face as he recited the details of my life with clinical precision. How do you... I've had people watching you since the day you disappeared. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if having me surveilled was the most natural thing in the world. Did you really think you could just vanish from my life without consequences? That I would simply forget about the woman who knew where I kept my guns, who had access to my private accounts, who shared my bed and my secrets? Each word hit me like a physical blow. The romantic part of me had hoped he'd been searching because he missed me, because what we'd had meant something to him. The reality was much colder. I was a security risk that needed to be managed. You had me followed, I whispered. I had you protected. Vincent pocketed his phone and straightened his tie, the gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. There are people in this city who would use you to get to me, Jasmine. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt a pregnant woman if they thought it would give them leverage. As if summoned by his words, the restaurant's front door chimed, and I heard the distinctive click of expensive heels crossing the marble floor. Through the frosted glass, I could see a woman's silhouette approaching our private dining room. Tall, elegant, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged in Vincent's world. Expecting someone? I asked, though my stomach was already sinking. Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Isabella Rossetti, my business partner. The way he hesitated before business partner told me everything I needed to know. The door opened without a knock, and Isabella Rossetti swept into the room like she owned it. She was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average height, sophisticated where I was struggling, polished where I was worn down by life. Her black hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her red dress probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Vincent, darling, she purred, her Italian accent making even simple words sound seductive. I heard you were having dinner with business associates. I thought I might join you. Her dark eyes swept over me dismissively, taking in my server's uniform and obvious exhaustion, before settling on Vincent's face. Though it seems your meeting has ended early. Isabella, Vincent's voice carried a warning that made the hair on my arm stand up. This is a private conversation. Of course it is. Isabella's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Though I do hope you're not planning to be late for our engagement announcement next week. The venue is already booked, and I've invited all the important families. The words hit me like ice water. Engagement announcement. Of course. While I'd been struggling to survive, Vincent had been planning a future with someone else. Someone who fit into his world, who understood the rules of his game. That's wonderful, I managed to say, proud that my voice came out steady. Congratulations to you both. Isabella's smile became genuine for the first time since she'd entered the room. How sweet of you. Vincent always did have such well-trained staff. The insult was delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that spoke of years of practice. I felt my cheeks burn, but before I could respond, Vincent moved. It was subtle, just a shift in his posture. But suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Isabella. His voice was deadly quiet. Leave. Now. For a moment, the sophisticated mask slipped, and I saw genuine fear flash across Isabella's face. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Whatever power she thought she had over Vincent, it clearly had limits. Of course, darling. I'll see you at home tonight. She leaned up to kiss his cheek, her eyes never leaving mine as she did. The message was clear. He might be talking to me now, but she was the one going home with him. The silence after she left was deafening. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style for the first time since I'd known him. It was such a human gesture that it reminded me why I'd fallen for him in the first place. "She's beautiful," I said finally. "She's convenient. Convenient enough to marry." Vincent turned to face me fully, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. The engagement was arranged by our families, a business merger disguised as a romance. I agreed to it because I thought the woman I actually wanted was gone forever. The admission hung between us like a live wire. I wanted to believe him, wanted to think that what we'd had was real. But I'd learned the hard way that Vincent Castellano was a master manipulator. Every word he spoke was calculated, every gesture designed to achieve a specific outcome. "What do you want from me, Vincent?" "What I've always wanted." He stepped closer again, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "You. In my home, in my bed, carrying my children and wearing my ring. And Isabella? Will be dealt with." The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. This was the Vincent I remembered from the darker moments of our relationship, the one who solved problems with money and violence in equal measure, the one who made people disappear when they became inconvenient. "I won't be part of that world again," I said, backing toward the door. "I won't raise my child around violence and crime. Our child—" Vincent's voice stopped me with my hand on the door handle. "And you're already part of that world, Jasmine. You have been since the moment you conceived my baby. There's no neutral ground in my life, no safe spaces for the people I care about. You're either under my protection, or you're a target for my enemies. That's not a choice. That's a threat. It's reality." Vincent straightened his cufflinks, the gesture so practiced it looked like muscle memory. "I'll give you 24 hours to think about it. After that, I'll make the decision for you. And if I run again?" Vincent's smile was sharp and predatory. "You won't. Not this time. Not when you know what's at stake." He moved past me to open the door, his hand briefly touching my shoulder. The contact was light, almost gentle, but it felt like a brand burning through my uniform. "Marcus will drive you home tonight," he said without looking back. "From now on, you don't walk alone after dark. And Jasmine?" He paused at the threshold. "Start taking better care of yourself. You're eating for two now." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the burgundy-walled room with the scent of his cologne and the echo of an ultimatum I couldn't escape. 23 hours and 47 minutes. That's how long I had left when Vincent's black Mercedes pulled up outside Bellacourt the next evening. I'd spent the day in a haze of nausea and anxiety, my hands shaking every time I tried to serve a table. Marcus had finally sent me to the back office to organize inventory, code for keeping me away from customers when I was clearly falling apart. Through the restaurant's front windows, I watched Vincent emerge from the car like he was walking onto a movie set. His charcoal suit was different from yesterday's but equally expensive, and he moved with the fluid confidence of a man who'd never been told no. The maitre d' practically genuflected as Vincent entered, and I heard him ask for me by name. My reflection in the office's black computer screen showed a woman who looked like she'd aged 5 years in 24 hours. Dark circles ringed my eyes, and my uniform hung loose on my frame, despite the subtle curve that was just beginning to show. I'd barely kept down saltine crackers and ginger tea, and the constant stress was making the morning sickness worse. "Jasmine." Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You have a visitor. He's requested the private dining room again." I wanted to refuse, to climb out the back window and disappear into the Chicago night. Instead, I smoothed my hair and walked toward my fate like a woman heading to her own execution. Vincent was standing with his back to me when I entered, studying one of the oil paintings that decorated the burgundy walls. In the evening light filtering through the restaurant's tall windows, he looked younger somehow. More like the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago than the dangerous stranger who'd cornered me yesterday. "You came," he said, without turning around. "I work here. Where else would I be?" "Running." Vincent faced me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before: uncertainty. It's what you do when things become complicated. The accusation stung because it was true. I had run, disappearing in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on my back. But he didn't know why. Didn't understand what I'd seen that final evening that had shattered every illusion I'd had about our relationship. "I had my reasons," I said, settling into the chair across from him at the massive mahogany table. "Tell me." Those 2 words carried more weight than most people's entire conversations. Vincent Castellano didn't ask for explanations. He demanded them. But there was something different in his tone now. A vulnerability that made my chest tight, with remembered affection. I closed my eyes, letting myself drift back to that night 3 years ago. I'd been living in Vincent's penthouse for 6 months, playing house with a man whose business I didn't fully understand. I told myself he was in real estate, that the mysterious phone calls and late-night meetings were just part of being successful. I was naive enough to believe my own lies. "It was a Tuesday," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "You were supposed to be in New York for the week, but your flight got canceled. I decided to surprise you at your office with dinner." Vincent's jaw tightened. He knew where this story was going. "I used the private elevator, the one you gave me the code for. I wanted to be romantic, spread out takeout from that little Italian place you loved on your conference table." My hands twisted in my lap as the memories flooded back. "But when the doors opened, you weren't alone. Jasmine, there was so much blood, Vincent." The words came out in a rush. 3 years of suppressed trauma spilling out like a broken dam. That man was tied to a chair, and he was begging. And you were just standing there watching Marco work him over like it was entertainment. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Vincent's face had gone completely blank, the mask he wore in public sliding into place. But I wasn't done. I'd held this inside for too long. I dropped the food. The containers hit the marble floor and made this loud crash, and everyone turned to look at me. The man in the chair, he looked right at me with these desperate eyes, like he thought I might save him. Tears I'd been holding back for years finally spilled over, but I just stood there. I was so shocked, so scared, that I couldn't move. "You weren't supposed to see that," Vincent said quietly. But I did. And you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the violence. It wasn't even the blood. It was the way you looked at me afterward, like you were calculating whether I was going to become a problem that needed to be solved. Vincent flinched like I'd slapped him. "I never would have hurt you." "Wouldn't you?" I met his eyes directly, seeing my own pain reflected back at me. Because for about 30 seconds in that elevator, I wasn't sure. For 30 seconds, I saw you look at me the same way you'd been looking at that man in the chair. "That's not..." Vincent started, then stopped. His hands clenched into fists on the table's polished surface. "You're right. In that moment, I was thinking about damage control, about protecting my business, my family, my future. I wasn't thinking about protecting you." The admission hit me harder than I'd expected. Part of me had hoped he would deny it, would swear that he'd never seen me as anything but the woman he loved. But Vincent had always been brutally honest, even when the truth was ugly. "So I ran," I continued. "I went home, packed a bag, and caught the first bus out of the city. I thought if I disappeared, if I became invisible, you'd move on to someone who fit better in your world. Like Isabella." "Like Isabella," I agreed. Someone who already knew the rules, who wouldn't be shocked by the reality of who you are. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm I recognized. It was what he did when he was thinking, weighing options, planning his next move. "I looked for you," he said finally. "For months, I had every resource at my disposal searching for any trace of where you'd gone. I told myself it was about security, about making sure you wouldn't talk to the wrong people. But the truth was, I missed you. I missed coming home to someone who saw me as just Vincent, not Vincent Castellano the businessman, or Vincent Castellano the threat. I couldn't be that person anymore, not after what I saw. And now? Could you be that person now?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I thought about my tiny apartment, about my mother's medical bills, about the baby growing inside me who would need stability and security. I thought about Isabella Rossetti's perfect smile and the engagement announcement that was supposedly happening next week. What are you really offering me, Vincent? Because yesterday you made it sound like I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. Vincent reached across the table, his fingers barely brushing mine. But some choices have consequences. If you stay with me, you'll be protected, provided for, loved. But you'll also be part of a world that operates by different rules than the one you grew up in. And if I don't? Then you'll struggle to raise our child alone, while my enemies circle like vultures, waiting for an opportunity to use you against me. Because make no mistake, Jasmine, the moment you conceived my baby, you became a permanent part of my world whether you wanted to or not. I pulled my hands back, pressing them protectively against my stomach. That's not love, Vincent. That's ownership. Sometimes they're the same thing. The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. This was the fundamental difference between us. I saw love as freedom, as choice, as mutual respect. Vincent saw it as possession, protection, control. I need time to think. Time is a luxury we don't have. Vincent's phone buzzed against the table, and he glanced at the screen with a frown. Isabella's family is asking questions about the engagement. If I call it off without explanation, they'll want to know why. And if they find out about you, about the baby. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I could see the implications written across his face. Isabella wasn't just his fiancée. She was a business arrangement, a peace treaty between powerful families. Breaking that treaty would have consequences that rippled far beyond our personal drama. So, what do you suggest? Come home with me tonight. Let me show you that the man you fell in love with is still there, underneath all the rest. Give us a chance to be a family. And Isabella? Will be handled appropriately. Vincent's voice carried that dangerous quiet again. My engagement to her was never about love, Jasmine. It was about politics, about maintaining alliances that keep my legitimate businesses safe. But politics can change. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that 3 years apart had changed something fundamental about our dynamic. But as I looked across the table at Vincent Castellano, powerful, dangerous, beautiful Vincent, I realized that nothing had really changed at all. He was still offering me a gilded cage, and I was still desperate enough to consider climbing inside. "One night," I said finally. "I'll come home with you for one night. But I make no promises beyond that." Vincent's smile was brilliant and terrifying. One night is all I need. Vincent's penthouse hadn't changed at all in the 3 years since I'd fled. The same floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Chicago's skyline. The same abstract paintings decorated walls painted in soothing grays and whites, and the same dangerous sense of luxury permeated every carefully chosen detail. Standing in the familiar space felt like stepping back in time, as if the terrified young woman who'd packed her bags in the middle of the night had never existed. "You redecorated the bedroom," I observed, following Vincent down the hallway toward what had once been our shared space. I couldn't sleep in there, not with everything still arranged the way you liked it. His voice was matter of fact, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders. I've been using the guest room for the past 3 years. The admission surprised me. I'd imagined him moving on quickly, replacing me with a succession of beautiful women who understood his world better than I ever had. The idea that he'd preserved our bedroom like a shrine was both touching and deeply unsettling. "Where will I sleep tonight?" I asked, suddenly aware of how presumptuous it had been to come here. One night didn't necessarily mean sharing a bed, despite the history between us. "Wherever you're comfortable." Vincent stopped outside the master bedroom door, his hand resting on the handle. "Your things are still in the closet if you want to change into something more comfortable." My things. After 3 years, my clothes were probably outdated and might not even fit, especially with my body beginning to change. But the gesture touched something deep inside me, a part that had always been vulnerable to Vincent's particular brand of caring. The bedroom took my breath away. He'd replaced the California king bed with something even larger, the frame made of dark wood that complemented new furniture throughout the space. But my clothes still hung in the walk-in closet exactly where I'd left them, and my books were still stacked on the nightstand beside what had been my side of the bed. "I had them cleaned periodically," Vincent said from the doorway, watching me touch the sleeve of a silk blouse I'd forgotten I owned, "and I replaced anything that showed wear." "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Because I never stopped hoping you'd come home." I turned to face him, this powerful man who just admitted to 3 years of pathetic waiting, and felt something crack inside my chest. "Vincent, there's something else you should see." He moved to the nightstand and pulled out a manila envelope. "This arrived this morning." My hands shook as I opened it, revealing photographs that made my blood run cold. Pictures of me walking to work, leaving my apartment, visiting my mother at the hospital. But these weren't taken by Vincent's security team. The angles were wrong, taken from too far away, and there was something predatory about the way they'd been shot. "Isabella's family," Vincent explained, his voice deadly quiet. "They've been watching you for weeks, trying to understand why I've been distracted. It seems they've drawn their own conclusions. The implications hit me like ice water. Isabella's family knew about me, which meant I was no longer just Vincent's problem to solve. I was a threat to a carefully balanced alliance between powerful people who didn't hesitate to eliminate obstacles. They know about the baby? Not yet, but it's only a matter of time." Vincent took the photographs from my trembling hands. "Isabella's father called me this afternoon. He wants to move the engagement announcement up to this weekend. He's concerned about my commitment to the family." I sank onto the edge of the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "So this is about politics after all. You're not offering me protection. You're trying to manage a crisis." "Both can be true." Vincent sat beside me, careful to maintain distance between us. "I won't pretend that timing isn't a factor. But Jasmine, I've had 3 years to move on, to forget about you, and build a life with someone appropriate. Do you really think I would have wasted all that time if I didn't love you?" Love. The word hung between us like a fragile thing, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. In Vincent's world, love was possession, protection, control. But it was also the closest thing to vulnerability he was capable of showing. What happens to Isabella? She'll be compensated for the inconvenience. Her family will receive alternative considerations for their cooperation. No one gets hurt, but the engagement ends. And if they refuse? Vincent's silence was answer enough. I'd seen firsthand what happened to people who refused Vincent Castellano's offers, tied to chairs in his office while Marco demonstrated the price of non-compliance. I can't be responsible for someone getting hurt because of me, I said quietly. You're not responsible for anything except deciding what kind of life you want for our child. Vincent's hand moved to cover mine where it rested on my stomach. I can give you everything, Jasmine. Security, luxury, protection. Our baby will never want for anything. Except a father who isn't a criminal. I'm a businessman who operates in gray areas. There's a difference. Is there? I turned to face him fully. Because 3 years ago, I saw you torture a man for information. That didn't look like a gray area to me. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. That man had stolen money meant to fund a children's hospital. Money that would have paid for cancer treatments for kids who couldn't afford them otherwise. Sometimes justice requires methods that courts can't provide. The explanation was smooth, practiced, designed to make violence seem noble. And the terrifying thing was, part of me wanted to believe it. Part of me wanted to accept that Vincent's darkness served some greater good, that loving him didn't make me complicit in horrible things. I need time to think, I said for the second time in 2 days. Think while you eat. Vincent stood, straightening his tie in a gesture that was purely masculine confidence. I had Rosa prepare your favorite dinner. It should be ready now. Rosa had been Vincent's housekeeper when I lived here, a grandmother from Guatemala who'd treated me like the daughter she'd lost to violence in her home country. The idea that she was still here, still cooking the comfort foods that had helped me feel at home in this alien world, brought tears to my eyes. Dinner was exactly what I'd hoped. Rosa's famous chicken mole with handmade tortillas, followed by her tres leches cake that tasted like childhood dreams. Vincent had changed into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking more like the man I'd fallen for, and less like the dangerous stranger who'd cornered me at Bellacourt. Tell me about the baby, he said over dessert. Have you seen a doctor? Had an ultrasound? I can't afford prenatal care. The admission was humiliating but necessary. I've been taking vitamins and reading pregnancy books from the library. Vincent's fork clattered against his plate. You haven't seen a doctor at all. The free clinic has a 3-month waiting list, and the emergency room is only for emergencies. This ends tomorrow. Vincent's voice carried that tone of absolute authority that I remembered all too well. I'm calling Dr. Martinez first thing in the morning. She's the best obstetrician in the city. Vincent, I can't. You can, and you will. He reached across the table to take my hand. This isn't negotiable, Jasmine. You're carrying my child, and I will not allow either of you to receive substandard care because of pride. The possessive way he said my child should have annoyed me. Instead, it sent a warm flutter through my chest that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. For the first time in months, someone else was taking responsibility, shouldering the burden of worry that had been crushing me. What does this make us? I asked quietly. A family. Vincent's thumb traced circles on my wrist, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. However unconventional, however complicated. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the words made my blood run cold. Enjoying your reunion? Some secrets are harder to keep than others. A friend. Vincent saw my expression change and took the phone before I could protest. His face went deadly still as he read the message. And when he looked up at me, I saw the Vincent Castellano that other people feared. Pack your things, he said quietly. All of them. You're not going back to that apartment. Vincent, this isn't a request. He was already on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian to someone on the other end. Marco, I need a full security detail at Riverside Apartments, Building 3, Apartment 2B. Clean sweep, then secure the perimeter. Yes, tonight. The conversation continued, but I stopped listening. The game had changed again, the stakes raised by enemies I didn't even know I had. Whatever illusion I'd maintained about having choices in this situation had just evaporated like morning mist. I was Vincent Castellano's woman now, whether I wanted to be or not. And in his world, that made me both the most protected and most dangerous thing in Chicago. 3 weeks in Vincent's penthouse had settled into a routine that felt deceptively normal. Mornings began with prenatal vitamins and freshly squeezed orange juice that Rosa brought to my bedside. Afternoons were spent reading pregnancy books in the library while Vincent conducted business from his home office, and evenings ended with quiet dinners where we talked about everything except the obvious questions hanging between us. Dr. Martinez had confirmed what I already knew. I was healthy, the baby was developing normally, and I was due in April. She'd also lectured me extensively about the importance of reducing stress, apparently unaware that living with Chicago's most dangerous man, while his enemies circled like vultures, was not exactly conducive to peace of mind. "Your blood pressure is elevated," Vincent said, emerging from his office with a file folder I wasn't supposed to see. "Dr. Martinez called with your latest test results. It's stress." I didn't look up from the novel I was pretending to read. Something about a woman who found love in a small coastal town where the most dangerous thing was a summer storm. Hard to avoid when I'm essentially under house arrest. "You're under protection." Vincent's voice carried that edge it got whenever I challenged the narrative he'd constructed around our situation. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because I haven't left this building in 3 weeks except for doctor's appointments with an armed escort." Vincent set the file on the coffee table and sat beside me on the leather sofa, close enough that I could smell his cologne, but not quite touching. It was a careful distance that we'd both maintained since that first night, circling each other like dancers afraid to commit to the steps. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show you what?" "Your blood pressure. It spikes when you're lying to me." Despite everything, I almost smiled. Vincent had always been able to read my body's responses better than I could, a skill that had served him well in both business and bed. Now he was using it to call out my emotional evasions. "I'm not lying. I am stressed. But not about the house arrest." Vincent's gray eyes studied my face with the intensity I remembered from our early days together. "What aren't you telling me, Jasmine?" The honest answer was that I'd been having dreams about Isabella Rossetti. Not nightmares exactly, but vivid scenarios where Vincent's former fiancée appeared in our bedroom like a vengeful ghost, her perfect red lips curved in that sharp smile as she whispered about engagements and family obligations. I'd wake up feeling guilty for something I couldn't name, my hand pressed protectively over my growing belly. "The engagement announcement was supposed to happen last weekend," I said instead. "Isabella's family must be wondering why it was postponed. Isabella's family is no longer your concern." The way he said it made something cold slither down my spine. "Vincent, what did you do?" "I handled a business problem." Vincent's expression gave nothing away, but I'd learned to read the subtle signs, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. "Isabella has been relocated to her family's interest in Milan. She won't be returning to Chicago." Relocated. I tasted the word like something bitter. That's a polite way of saying exiled. It's a polite way of saying she's alive and living comfortably in Italy instead of at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Vincent's bluntness hit me like a slap. Her father was less understanding about the situation than I'd hoped. Apparently, calling off an engagement after 3 years requires more explanation than business considerations. The casual mention of Lake Michigan made my stomach lurch. "You threatened to kill her?" "I didn't have to. Her father did that himself when he suggested that your disappearance could be arranged if it would preserve the alliance." Vincent's voice went deadly quiet. "That's when I made it clear that anyone who touched you would face consequences that made Lake Michigan look merciful." I set down my book with shaking hands. 3 weeks of domestic tranquility had made me forget the reality of Vincent's world, the casual violence that lurked beneath every business decision. Isabella wasn't just gone. She was gone because her family had threatened me, and Vincent had responded with typical Castellano diplomacy. "How many people have you killed, Vincent?" The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I'd never asked before. Too afraid of the answer. Too invested in maintaining the illusion that the man I loved was separate from the monster who solved problems with violence. Do you really want to know? Yes. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the Chicago skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. When he spoke, his voice was steady and matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. Directly, 4 people. All of them were immediate threats to my family or my business. One was the man you saw in my office 3 years ago. He'd been selling information about our operations to the FBI while stealing from our accounts. 2 were contract killers sent by a rival family to eliminate my father. The 4th was a pedophile who'd been targeting children in neighborhoods under my protection. Each revelation hit me like a physical blow. 4 people. 4 lives that Vincent had ended with his own hands, and he recited the facts like he was reading from a grocery list. And indirectly? More. Vincent finally looked at me, and I saw something raw in his expression that made my chest tight. I don't keep count of the orders I've given, the problems I've solved, the threats I've eliminated. If I did, I'd never sleep. How do you live with it? By remembering why I do what I do. Vincent reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. Every person I've killed, every order I've given, it's been to protect something precious. My family, my business, the people under my care. Now that includes you and our baby. I never asked for that kind of protection. Neither did my mother when she married my father. Neither did my sister when she was born into this family. But protection isn't something you ask for in my world, Jasmine. It's something that's given, whether you want it or not. The mention of his family surprised me. Vincent rarely talked about his mother or sister, keeping them separate from the woman who shared his bed. I'd met them exactly once, at a formal dinner where I'd been introduced as his friend, and they'd been polite but distant. Where are they now? Your mother and sister? Safe. Vincent's answer was immediate and absolute. Living under assumed names in a place where my enemies can't find them. They gave up their old lives so they could live, really live, without constantly looking over their shoulders. Is that what you're offering me? A life in hiding? I'm offering you a life where you never have to work double shifts to pay for your mother's medication, where our child can attend the best schools and have every opportunity, where you can be yourself without worrying about rent or bills or whether there's enough food in the refrigerator. It was a compelling offer, and Vincent knew it. He'd always been good at identifying what people needed most and providing it in exchange for their loyalty. I needed security, stability, the luxury of not making life or death decisions based on my bank balance. And in exchange, you be mine. Completely. Exclusively. Permanently. Vincent's thumb traced circles on my wrist, a gesture that was both soothing and possessive. No more running, no more lies, no more pretending that what we have isn't real. Before I could respond, the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere in the penthouse. Vincent was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the gun I knew he kept concealed beneath his sweater. The domestic tranquility that had lulled me into complacency shattered like the window in his office. "Stay here," Vincent commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Don't move until I come back for you." But I could hear voices now, multiple men speaking in harsh whispers, and the soft thud of footsteps moving through the penthouse with military precision. "Rosa," I whispered, suddenly remembering that Vincent's housekeeper was still in the kitchen preparing dinner. The thought of her caught in whatever was happening made my blood run cold. Vincent heard me, and his expression darkened. "She's in the safe room. I sent her there the moment the perimeter alarm triggered." His phone buzzed with a text that made his jaw clench. "Marco's team is 2 minutes out. Just stay down and—" The library door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and smoke. 3 men in black tactical gear poured through the opening, their assault rifles trained on Vincent with practiced precision. I recognized the lead man from photographs Vincent had shown me. Antonio Rossetti, Isabella's older brother, his handsome face twisted with rage. "Vincent Castellano," Antonio said, his Italian accent thick with emotion. "You made a grave mistake when you humiliated my family." "Antonio." Vincent's voice was deadly calm, despite having 3 automatic weapons pointed at his chest. "This seems excessive, even for you. We could have handled this with a phone call." "Like you handled my sister." Antonio's finger moved to his trigger. "Shipped off to Milan like damaged goods, her reputation destroyed, her engagement broken because of some pregnant whore you couldn't let go." The word whore hit me like a physical blow, but before I could react, Vincent moved. It was a fluid motion I'd seen once before, 3 years ago in his office, his hand finding his concealed weapon and firing in one smooth arc. Antonio's shot went wide, shattering the window behind us, as Vincent's bullet found its mark in the man's shoulder. "That's for insulting the mother of my child," Vincent said conversationally, as Antonio dropped his rifle and fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The other 2 men hesitated for a fraction of a second, unsure whether to help their leader or continue the mission. That hesitation cost them everything. Vincent dove behind the leather sofa, pulling me down with him as gunfire erupted in the small space. The sound was deafening, nothing like the clean pops you heard in movies. It was chaos and violence, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with fear. "The baby," I gasped, my hands instinctively covering my stomach as bullets shredded the leather above our heads. "Stay down," Vincent commanded, reloading his weapon with movements that spoke of years of practice. "Whatever happens, protect your stomach and stay down." Through the sound of gunfire, I heard new voices shouting in English. Marco's team had arrived, and suddenly the library became a war zone between 2 groups of armed men, while I crouched behind furniture, praying that my unborn child would survive whatever vendetta had just exploded into our living room. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had started. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat and the soft moans of wounded men. Vincent's hand found mine in the darkness behind the sofa, his fingers warm and steady, despite the violence he'd just participated in. "It's over," he said quietly. "You can look now." I didn't want to look. I wanted to stay hidden behind the leather barrier where I could pretend that the last 5 minutes had been a nightmare, that I hadn't just watched the father of my unborn child kill men with the same casual efficiency he used to order dinner. But Vincent's hand was pulling me up, and I found myself staring at a scene that would haunt my dreams for years to come. Antonio Rossetti was still alive, though barely. His shoulder wound had soaked through his tactical vest, and his face had gone the gray-white color of shock and blood loss. The other 2 men hadn't been as fortunate. They lay motionless near the destroyed doorway, their weapons scattered across Rose's carefully polished marble floor. Marco stood over them like a guardian angel of death, his usually immaculate suit torn and blood-spattered. 3 other men I didn't recognize were checking the bodies, their movements professional and emotionless. "Clean sweep," Marco reported to Vincent. "No other intruders. The building is secure." "Good." Vincent holstered his weapon and moved to where Antonio lay bleeding. "Call Dr. Reyes. I want him stabilized and conscious for questioning." "Vincent, no," I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "He needs a hospital. He needs to answer for breaking into my home and threatening my family." Vincent's tone brooked no argument. "Dr. Reyes will keep him alive long enough to provide that information." I stared at the man I loved, this person who could switch from protective partner to merciless interrogator in the space of a heartbeat, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This was who Vincent really was. Not the man who brought me orange juice and worried about my blood pressure, but the one who shot people in his living room and called it Tuesday. "I can't do this," I whispered. "Jasmine, I can't raise a child in this world. My voice grew stronger as the reality of our situation crystallized. I can't live somewhere that people break down the door with assault rifles because of business disagreements. I can't love someone who solves problems by shooting them. Vincent's expression went completely blank, the mask sliding into place that I'd learned to fear. You don't have a choice anymore. Tonight proved that. My enemies know about you, about the baby. Leaving me won't make you safe. It'll make you an easy target. Then I'll disappear. Really disappear this time. Somewhere you'll never find me. With what money? What resources? Vincent's voice was patient, logical, devastating. You have $400 in your bank account and a mother who needs expensive medical treatment. You think you can protect our child better than I can? The truth of his words hit me like ice water. I was trapped not just by his power, but by my own limitations, my own desperate circumstances that had led me back to him in the first place. Antonio Rossetti had found me once. Others would too. I could run to the ends of the earth, but I'd always be looking over my shoulder, always wondering if today was the day my past caught up with me. What happens to him? I asked, nodding toward Antonio. He tells me who else knows about you, who else might be planning similar visits. Then he goes to join his sister in Italy, minus a few fingers as a reminder about the consequences of threatening my family. The casual mention of torture made my stomach lurch. And if I stay? If I accept this life, this world, what guarantees do I have that our child won't end up like that someday? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying my face like he was memorizing every detail. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my chest tight. None. I can't promise you that our son or daughter won't inherit enemies along with my name. I can't guarantee that they won't have to make hard choices, that they won't have to defend what's theirs with violence. What I can promise is that they'll never be weak, never be vulnerable, never be at the mercy of people who would use them for their own ends. That's not the life I wanted for my child, but it's the life they're going to have. Vincent moved closer, his hand resting gently on my cheek. The question is whether they'll have it with both parents who love them, or with a mother who's constantly running from shadows. As if in response to his words, the baby kicked for the first time since the shooting started. A strong flutter that reminded me that whatever choices I made, I wasn't making them just for myself anymore. I was making them for a tiny person who deserved better than a life spent hiding, but who also deserved better than a life spent surrounded by violence. I need time to think, I said, for what felt like the 100th time since Vincent had walked back into my life. Time is a luxury we no longer have. Vincent's thumb traced my cheekbone with infinite gentleness, a stark contrast to the devastation surrounding us. The Rossetti family has declared war. You're either under my protection, or you're a casualty of their revenge. There's no neutral ground anymore, Jasmine. There never really was. 6 months later, I stood in the nursery of Vincent's penthouse, my hands resting on my rounded belly as I watched Chicago's skyline shimmer in the late afternoon sun. The room was perfect. Soft yellow walls, white furniture, and a mobile of delicate silver stars that caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the ceiling. Everything a baby could need, everything money could buy, everything except the certainty that they would be safe in the world their father had created. Jordan was due in 3 weeks. We'd chosen the name together during one of our quiet evenings, Vincent reading pregnancy books while I organized tiny clothes that Rosa insisted on washing by hand. Jordan Castellano. Even the name carried weight in this city, a legacy of power and protection that would follow our child for the rest of their life. You're thinking too hard again, Vincent said from the doorway, his voice carrying that gentle amusement I'd come to treasure. Dr. Martinez said stress isn't good for the baby. Dr. Martinez says a lot of things. I turned to face him, noting the way his suit jacket hung open and his tie was loosened. He'd been in meetings all day, the kind that left him tense and dangerous, though he tried to hide it from me. How did the Rossetti situation resolve? Vincent's expression flickered for just a moment, before settling back into carefully neutral lines. It's handled. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you need. Vincent moved into the nursery, his hand finding mine and guiding it to rest against his chest. The threat is neutralized. You and Jordan are safe. The way he said neutralized made my blood run cold. I'd learned Vincent's vocabulary over the past 6 months, the euphemisms he used to describe the darker aspects of his business. Neutralized meant dead. Handled meant buried. Resolved meant that somewhere in Chicago, people who had threatened his family were no longer breathing. How many this time? Jasmine. How many, Vincent? My voice carried a strength that surprised both of us. Pregnancy had changed me in ways beyond the physical. I'd grown a spine somewhere between the first ultrasound and the baby shower that Vincent's mother had insisted on throwing. 3, including Antonio. Vincent's honesty was brutal and necessary. They were planning to take you during one of your doctor's appointments. Marco intercepted their communications 2 days ago. The casual mention of kidnapping made my knees weak. Even now, even with all of Vincent's protection, his enemies were still circling, still looking for ways to hurt him through me. The baby kicked as if sensing my distress, a strong flutter that reminded me why Vincent's darkness was sometimes necessary. Your mother called, I said, changing the subject to something safer. She wants to visit next week, before Jordan arrives. Vincent's face softened immediately. Maria Castellano was a small, fierce woman who'd raised 2 children in the shadow of organized crime and somehow managed to keep her soul intact. She'd accepted me with a warmth that still surprised me, treating me like the daughter she'd never had instead of the liability I sometimes felt like. She's bringing Sophia too. They want to meet their grandchild properly. Vincent's sister had been more cautious in her acceptance, protective of her brother in ways that spoke of shared childhood trauma. But she'd warmed to me over the months, especially after I'd helped her navigate a difficult divorce from a man who'd tried to use her connections for his own advancement. Will it be safe for them to travel? Marco's handling their security personally. They'll be fine. Vincent's hand moved to cover mine where it rested on my belly. Jordan's going to have so much family, so much love. More than either of us ever had growing up. It was true. My mother had passed peacefully 2 months ago, her medical bills finally conquered by Vincent's resources, her last days spent in comfort instead of pain. She died holding my hand and Vincent's, blessing our unconventional union with her final words. Love him carefully, sweetheart. Men like that break easy, even when they look strong. I miss her, I said quietly. I know, but she got to see you happy, got to know her grandchild was coming into a world where they'd be protected and cherished. That's more than most people get. Vincent was right, as he usually was about the practical aspects of life and death. My mother's final months had been the best she'd had since her diagnosis, filled with private nurses and experimental treatments that insurance would never have covered. Vincent had given her dignity in dying, and me, peace in grieving. The sound of the elevator arriving in the penthouse made us both tense. Vincent was immediately alert, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon he always carried. But then, Marco's voice called out the all-clear code they'd established months ago. Boss, we have a situation, Marco announced as he appeared in the nursery doorway. Despite 6 months of working together, he still treated me with the careful respect due to Vincent's woman, rather than anything approaching friendship. What kind of situation? Vincent's voice carried that dangerous edge I'd learned to fear. Isabella Rossetti is downstairs. She says she has information about another threat, something her family was planning before. Marco's pause was delicate. Before Vincent had eliminated them. She wants to negotiate. The name hit me like ice water. Isabella Rossetti, Vincent's former fiancée, the woman whose engagement had been broken because of me, whose family had died because they'd threatened my life. I'd assumed she was safely tucked away in Milan, removed from the complicated web of Chicago politics. She came back, I said unnecessarily. She never left, Vincent replied grimly. Milan was a cover story. She's been hiding in the city, gathering allies, planning something. I should have known she wouldn't accept exile quietly. What does she want? To finish what her family started. Vincent's expression was deadly calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when he was calculating odds and outcomes. Marco, how many men does she have with her? Just herself. She came alone, said she wanted to talk. Vincent's laugh was sharp and humorless. Isabella Rossetti doesn't do anything alone. She's here as a distraction while something else happens. As if summoned by his words, the building's fire alarm began to wail. Vincent's phone immediately exploded with incoming calls, and I could hear shouting from somewhere far below us. Marco was speaking rapidly into his earpiece, coordinating with security teams throughout the building. Smoke in the parking garage, Marco reported. Looks like an incendiary device, but no structural damage. Could be a diversion. Or it could be an attempt to force us out of the building. Vincent was already moving, his mind working through possibilities with frightening speed. Get Jasmine to the safe room. Full lockdown protocol. Vincent, no. I grabbed his arm as he started toward the door. Whatever Isabella wants, whatever she's planning, don't face it alone. Let Marco handle it. I can't. Vincent's voice was gentle but absolute. She came for me, Jasmine. If I send someone else to deal with her, it looks like weakness. In my world, weakness gets you killed. In your world, everything gets you killed. The words burst out of me with months of suppressed fear and frustration. Can't you see that this will never end? There will always be another enemy, another threat, another reason why you have to put yourself in danger. Vincent stopped, his gray eyes studying my face with an intensity that made my chest tight. Are you asking me to choose? Between protecting my family and protecting you? I'm asking you to think about Jordan, about the life you want them to have, the father you want to be. I pressed his hand against my belly, where our child was moving restlessly, as if sensing the tension between us. I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, there's another way. For a moment, Vincent's mask slipped entirely. I saw the man underneath the reputation, the one who'd grown up in violence and learned to solve problems with force because it was the only language his world understood. I saw someone who was tired of fighting, tired of always being one step ahead of death, tired of living in a reality where love meant putting targets on the backs of everyone you cared about. There is no other way, he said finally. Not for people like me. Not for people like us. Then maybe it's time to stop being people like us. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his hand still pressed against my belly where Jordan was kicking with increasing urgency. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my heart race. After tonight, after I deal with Isabella, after I make sure there are no more immediate threats to our family, we'll talk about alternatives. But right now, the only way to protect you and Jordan is to end this the way it started. With violence. With finality. Vincent kissed me then, soft and desperate and full of promises I wasn't sure he could keep. Then he was gone, following Marco toward whatever confrontation Isabella had orchestrated, leaving me alone in our perfect nursery with our unborn child and the growing certainty that the man I loved was walking toward something that would change us forever. I pressed my hands against my belly and whispered to Jordan about a different world, one where their father could be just Vincent instead of Vincent Castellano, where protection didn't require bloodshed, where love didn't come with a body count. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they were fantasies. Vincent was right. There was no other way for people like us. The only question was whether I could live with that truth, or whether it would destroy whatever future we were trying to build together. Outside, Chicago glittered in the fading light, beautiful and dangerous and utterly unforgiving. Somewhere in that sprawling city, the final chapter of our story was being written in blood and fire, and all I could do was wait to see how it ended.